Hey, good morning, Molly. How have you been? It's
Doing well. Excited to talk more.
wonderful. It's wonderful catching up with you on how libp2p can impact Fil-Oz and its mission within the Filecoin ecosystem. We love to hear from you on the technical, strategic, and community aspects. So let's begin with enhancing Filecoin network performance, specifically with focus on resilient storage and retrieval. So how do you think libp2p's peer-to-peer networking features enhance the efficiency and reliability of Filecoin storage and retrieval markets? Which are key areas of focus for Fil-Oz?
Awesome. There's a couple of different areas where libp2p is heavily used in Filecoin today, and specific areas where improvements would be useful, just to also touch on some of the scalability connectivity side of things. One major area that Fil-Oz and a couple of other teams in the Filecoin ecosystem are working on is the launch of Filecoin Fast Finality, which relies upon libp2p pubsub to communicate and achieve fast finality over new blocks that are agreed upon within Filecoin expected consensus, which is the previous or legacy consensus mechanism used within Filecoin. Fast finality is a fast gadget on top of that to quickly have a super majority quorum to finalize the blocks, and relies heavily on pubsub. What we've been noticing is we're actually maxing out pubsub bandwidth usage. We have a highly distributed global network of all storage providers participating in consensus, who are then participating in this fast finality mechanism, utilizing pubsub to gossip and finalize blocks, and our expectation of how quickly those blocks would propagate and how quickly we'd be able to achieve quorum. We have been making iterations and improvements inside of pubsub as we've been running passive testing scenarios. But this is an area where I think both Filecoin and some of the work that Ethereum is proposing with the beam chain design from Justin Drake would really scale reliance on libp2p pubsub and the bandwidth optimizations that could power that. And so this is really an area that would significantly improve Filecoin scalability and interoperability with other chains. Another aspect, just in general, Filecoin uses a number of different, libraries for doing data sharing between clients and storage providers or different types of service providers, also for checking retrievability of data. A lot of this is leaning more heavily on kind of like HTTP, but HTTP over libp2p is an interesting option here to also get some of the kind of like peer-to-peer resiliency components and be using a kind of more common libp2p framework to then also be able to interoperate more easily with other ecosystems. And so when it comes to like transferring data very efficiently, say between multiple different storage providers, or enabling two storage providers to like replicate the same data set, that's, I think, an interesting opportunity. Another aspect that a couple of groups are working on is erasure coding. And so having capabilities within libp2p that, most right now, I think people are doing erasure coding, and then they're using libp2p to distribute the erasure coded shards across multiple different nodes. Integration or thinking about how to intelligently fetch data from a set of erasure coded copies could be an interesting thing to think about, as a library style capability within libp2p. See if
Wonderful.
there's
I
anything else
mean,
that,
these
yeah, go ahead.
really cover wonderful aspects on scalability. I mean, I would say even cross-chain and EVM compatibility. Even I would go ahead and talk about a bit on cross-chain integration. Would love to hear your thoughts on.
Mhm.
I mean, if you're talking of Fil-Oz's work, and I mean, I've followed up some of the things you have been working on.
Mhm.
So, I mean, how do you think like libp2p can streamline cross-chain communication and interoperability in particular? I mean, that's a very interesting
Yep.
question that we have in hand. And any example you like to share on that front? And then we can talk a bit on the privacy, security, and trust part. Yeah. First, would love to hear on that a bit, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely, there's maybe a couple of different cross-chain use cases to think about from a design perspective. There's cross-chain between two, like a layer one and a layer two that are both running FVM and that are, networks. You have like an on-ramp smart contract or layer two that's working cross-chain with L1. The IPC team is probably a good team to collaborate with here because they're trying to do general message passing between those chains for things like deal making between the L2 and the L1. And so kind of seamlessly allowing L2 nodes to propagate messages that then land in L1 blocks, which, again, both of these networks use libp2p. Another example is people who are doing, say, cross-chain storage contracts where they're using something like, an Axelar Oracle, or maybe even some sort of trustless kind of like cross-chain bridge design to have a storage request from another network like Optimism or Base or Ethereum or some other network that's running libp2p make storage requests with Filecoin L1. The Glitter protocol was looking into the CCIP read mechanisms to allow both storing data, but also having kind of like a gateway that would fetch and propagate data from a storage contract back to those networks. And so again, both of these networks are using libp2p. They're fetching data, but they have kind of these like async await patterns for pulling data between these networks utilizing bridges. libp2p modeling and looking at the usage across those different contexts, I think is interesting. Maybe another thing that I'd flag that I think is really interesting, but I haven't seen people doing yet, with fast finality, it becomes possible for folks, given that, the Filecoin chain is all IPLD, content address data objects using libp2p, and libp2p and IPLD both have like, JavaScript and Rust and other implementations. It could be possible to write, super light clients that run inside of, say, a browser tab, which are then able to be an embedded module that makes your Filecoin storage deals from, say, within a web wallet or a context, a browser context. So that could be really interesting given libp2p has been iterating on web transport and more browser friendly, like browser tab to server interop, to look at the use case of, hey, how might we be using these web transports to also support embedded clients inside of browsers, especially as this might be like a more secure option for wallets, where instead of a wallet using a centralized infra service like an RPC provider or something, and like, sending off all its transactions, you can run your kind of like embedded local light node inside the browser tab itself and interact with kind of the libp2p powered network that you're working with. And so, we're excited about that, especially as it relates to F3. That node can be a lot lighter and require a lot less state and history, and you don't have to run an entire storage provider node. You could build a super light type of node that is just like an F3 message passing style browser node, which could then power all sorts of different client applications. And so we think that's really exciting and would be pumped to see some people who wanted to work on that really from the ground up in terms of taking on that as a project.
Wonderful.
And that would be interesting, again, from like across, like we think that's possible in Filecoin, but I think that could also be possible in other networks, and it could move the entire Web3 ecosystem forward.
Sure. No, but definitely, I think you really answered what we were looking at in terms of understanding how, libp2p's modular architecture could be useful. And I think that's right on the top of our priority as well. So thanks so much for sharing inputs on this. This actually brings me to another question on privacy, security, and the trust aspect, which is very, very important. So we would love to hear from you on how, libp2p security features like encrypted channels, authenticated peer IDs, I mean, how they could be useful to Fil-Oz and Filecoin in general to ensure that Filecoin storage and retrieval operations are secure and resilient against attacks. So that's one of the aspects we'd love to hear a bit more. And also on the privacy preserving protocols aspect, like how we could leverage the libp2p's capabilities to support privacy preserving networking. So I would love to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a thing that we are seeing is needed within Filecoin, and people have kind of like solutions for it right now, but we could upgrade and standardize those solutions more, is adding things like access controls into like the retrieval protocols from Filecoin storage providers. I think there's actually an MVP of kind of like a metered and then paid retrieval solution that the Fiddle team has been working on as a design that they're going to demo tomorrow. But generally helping storage providers or clients be like, hey, here's kind of like a whitelist or a set of access control lists for who can access my data when it's stored on a storage provider that both grants the client observability and control over their data privacy, but also creates hooks for, say, monitoring and observability systems to monitor the client's data on their behalf using decentralized solutions like the Spark retrieval checker that is a necessary network function for validating that the client is going to be able to get their data when they fetch it, but is also and making sure that like, okay, you're either a permissioned monitoring system or you are the client directly themselves. You're not some random on the internet person who is just spamming and DOS attacking me for bandwidth overhead. And so definitely as it relates to like better monitoring systems for storage providers to monitor their bandwidth and retrieval request usage, access control systems so that you could have a set of ACLs that are, easily monitored and granted both to clients themselves and to monitoring systems. Those are definitely important things from a privacy perspective. Something that it's like tangentially related to this. I don't know how libp2p related it is, but one of the things that is important to a lot of storage clients in Filecoin is knowing in what jurisdiction their data is stored, because there's different policies depending on where in the world you are. Maybe you want it stored in your local jurisdiction, et cetera. And so monitoring solutions around, great, if I claim to be in this area, there's increasing levels of confidence, maybe based on, auditors or other things that like this storage provider actually is in the location they claim to be, based on this storage ID, which allows me as a client to monitor or have a system, an automatic smart contract that's monitoring that on my behalf, that my data is where I have paid for it to be stored in the world, from a jurisdiction perspective. In terms of like privacy, if anything, some of our challenges more end up coming in Filecoin blockchain level, kind of from the observability side of like, is this network actually offering the quality of service to clients that it needs, and can we understand where it's falling short of those expectations and then fix it? But I would say there's probably like privacy preserving in terms of having like pools for storage that might do some amount of mixing. Like say there's maybe journalists in a certain area that want to be publishing data, or you want some group that can like verify and collect data that they are doing quality control over, but then they're obscuring kind of who initially requested that data to be stored. There might be something in there, but definitely something storage providers want as well, is like, great, if I'm making the effort to store this, I want to have the client themselves take responsibility that this is not data that I might get in trouble for as a storage provider for some reason. And so having bodies that can do some of that collection, take on that responsibility, but making sure that the storage provider and the client are both able to delegate that oversight and monitoring, and then have, privacy preserving communication between those groups,
Sure.
might be interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess
absolutely.
maybe authenticated peer IDs hits the they're authenticated that they're within a certain jurisdiction, or that they do belong to a certain storage provider or something, which could
Sure.
allow us to audit them or give them different permissions.
Absolutely. Now, this is really fantastic to hear. It really covers the security angle of what we are really looking at. And wish to share with you that all these three aspects we'll definitely love to cover in the coming days and months, specifically from the libp2ps and Filecoin vision. And I mean, specifically in reference to that we are beginning PLDG cohort 2 very soon.
Mhm,
There's one
mhm.
question on the educational initiatives front. Like, I mean, how do you see Fil-Oz and libp2p collaborate on educational initiatives to really help developers better understand and adopt libp2p for Filecoin related projects or specific projects? I mean, there's a
Yeah.
very good interest growing in that direction.
Yep. I mean, I think most projects that are using Filecoin use libp2p. So generally, I think things like some of the stuff that Phil B has worked on of creating templates, starter projects, good examples of hey, here's how you compose the things together. Here's your libp2p networking starter project for common smart contract or DApp use cases. That's, I think we've seen the most uptick from those sorts of initial outlines. Um, the so I would invest in that when it comes to growing usage within the Phil builder community, and then making that accessible in hackathons or other places where people are just getting started, or
Sure.
the SEO of hey, how do I get started with look at the other major DApp templates that
Sure.
might exist with the hard hats and truffles and whoever's a
Fill frame.
Foundry, whatever's the most popular of the world.
Yeah.
Make sure that there is kind of the libp2p networking component that's added into those. Definitely, having libp2p be a default within the OP stack is very useful for helping anyone who's building an L2 use libp2p by default. I would say that folks that are, if you're trying to think of people who are building new features in Filecoin today, collaborating with the Probe Lab team on monitoring and observability and tools that help tune libp2p for people's use cases, that might be the biggest thing that for Fil-Oz as Filecoin implementers and devs, and some of the teams we collaborate with the most, say within Curio or Venus or Forest or other client implementations. The biggest thing that would help us is better monitoring, observability tooling, simulation and testing types of things, especially, through this F3 process. We've definitely been running a lot of full chain simulations. There's a lot of things that we're not able to test well until we deploy it to the entire network, which is a pain point. So probably when it comes to that core devish style use case within Filecoin, making libp2p, easier to observe and monitor and benchmark, and make fixes to, is probably the most useful set of tools there. Obviously, anything that if folks start doing, great, there's now a browser client implementation in Filecoin. That could also be really interesting, and that would, depending on whether that's a Rust implementation or a JavaScript implementation, would create a whole new class of client that we are aiming to interop with. And then interoperability tests to make sure that that client is able to engage effectively with the Filecoin network, would be necessary.
Wonderful. So lovely to hear. I mean, all these different aspects in such a short duration. I mean, you've really answered all the questions we were looking at. Really, thank you so much for your mentorship and guidance to the overall libp2p community and Filecoin ecosystem. We definitely
Oh,
would love,
of course.
yeah, we would love to catch up
I know
more.
you also had a question on the hey, how might these both there's the PLDG contribution to these of like, great, the work being done, these are ideas or requests for projects that people might work on inside of PLDG, either coordinating with like Dave on the libp2p side or some of the folks within Fil-Oz. We have Rod and Mossy who are working on and Kuba who are working on the F3 side of things. We also have a chunk of folks that are working on kind of the more on-chain market, cross-chain storage contract side. Phil-B is also working on that as well. But we also have the retro funding side of things. And so, for example, the project around creating a browser client that interoperates would both potentially be available, like eligible as a, once you get like the early sketch of something that might be prospectively grant funded by the community, but also would definitely be eligible for retroactive rewards through Retro PGF. And so definitely want to highlight that even beyond the day-to-day work that's being sponsored and funded by the Dev Guild, there's also additional rewards and recognition for creating something that actually demonstrates impact. And I really push here. I've seen people sometimes do work and apply for Retro PGF with like, I made a thing. And you're like, great, I'm very glad you made a thing, but this is for funding impact. So you're going to need to collect metrics around like, how many people are downloading this? How many transactions are flowing through this? How many use cases or businesses have been built thanks to this? And so if you build these solutions, you also need to collect the success metrics around monitoring usage impact in order to be able to justify the impact you've created in a retroactive analysis.
Definitely. I think the learning on measurable impact is still evolving, and we'll definitely see folks doing projects with proper KPIs and metrics. So, absolutely. I mean, thanks for sharing that input. I mean, lovely catching up, Molly. I mean, fantastic set of pointers. I would say thoughts, feedback, discussions. I mean, everything that we're looking at. And thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I would nudge of all those groups I listed, they probably have even deeper feedback on the sorts of projects that would be interesting. So if any of those catch your eye, do one layer deeper than my high level here and go talk to the F3 team or go talk to the IPC team or go talk to the Phil Builders team to get an even deeper understanding of kind of like a good first issue to help in those areas.
Great. Thank you so much once again.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful